I'm Edgar Kramer from SoundStage Australia, and I'm here talking to Björn Bengtsson from Nordost. How are you, Björn?
I am very good, Edgar. Nice to see you.
Excellent. Let's have a quick chat. I've been thinking lately about some of the ideas and some of the philosophies and research that Nordost might have conducted when developing QPoint and QSource, two products I'm actually reviewing, and the review will be published fairly soon. So what have been some of those ideas behind the development of those products?
Well, if we start with the QSource, which is more a straightforward, old-fashioned product, as in with old established technology, with a linear power supply, and where we've been working with various ways of leading the heat away so that we're not forced to use a fan inside. It's a rather small enclosure that we have this product in. So it does get warm, but there is a pretty convenient way to get the air flowing in there and to lead heat away. And we use a big portion of the actual chassis as a heat sink.
Yes.
Other than that, the sourcing a really good transformer that fits into the chassis, making a very good. There is a bit of DC filtering inside, but we also want very little of the complicated circuitry in there. So it's a pretty straightforward but very, very well designed linear power supply. Mm-hmm. And also, of course, it needs to be adopted to our product, the QPoint, and also with the addition of having a couple of variable outputs. So we can. It's a very flexible and versatile product.
Yes.
So that is That's a couple of things about that. And it's, as I said, old established technology, basically. Whereas the QPoint, on the other hand, is something completely different.
Yes.
Where we have been developing technologies that started maybe 10 years ago in the company, with the first and foremost with the product called QX unit. That's when we first started elaborating and dealing with those electromagnetic field generators. And over the time, whereas the QX is basically a bit of a brute force approach, where we send out a rather big or
high powered,
strong field. We started to realize that there are things we can do without making so much effort in terms of the field generator part. Mm-hmm. So if we're more precise and knowing more what we do with it, so the clocking and the resonances are more precise and more controlled, we can control even more but use less force, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So we started to work with the idea of actually getting resonances in sync, which is one of the part in the QX. But this in the QPoint, it is dedicated, it's refined, and it's very, very precise. So we're pretty happy with the QPoint in both in the way it works and how it has been received. A lot of people do love it, and the people that do love it tends to expand on their ownership of that. So we find new and more adventurous use of that, and people are using it not only as we recommend to use them, and people seem to be very, very. If you're hooked by it, it seems like it's there to stay.
Okay, so I'm interested, because how are these people using them? Have you received some feedback from these users saying, okay, I know that you recommend them, QPoint to be placed underneath the component and fairly close to the capacitors and so on, but are they, in what other ways are they using them?
Yeah, well, mainly the feedback is close to speakers, and it does make sense. Where the crossover is. That right. We've seen, we've got a lot of feedback, people building small little frameworks or almost like a scaffolding behind the speaker.
Some sort of support. Yeah.
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 To
right.
make it address and be very close to the internal crossover, and a lot of people are very, very happy with it, and especially if you feed it from the same with the QSource, because then you have the same power feed to both channels.
Sure.
It just seems like every time two channels share like a power supply or a ground plane, like what we do with the Q core, it just benefits in stereo imaging and precision and all that. Whereas, two things that are meant to be one is hard to do unless you do various things to get them in sync. So
sure.
the two channels are in sync.
Okay. I'm interested in, and you touched on that just now, I'm interested in what manifestations, from your point of view, the QPoints engage with the equipment, and also the feedback that you're getting from users in terms of what they're finding as well. So how do these products manifest in terms of sound quality?
Yeah, if you look at the QPoint, to me it seems to be two different ways that are very, very significant in how you determine and how you define this is a great improvement. One is when you add the product, like with the QSource, there is an immediate increase of control, depth, SoundStage, pretty much everything you can possibly talk about. And that is an immediate improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the QPoint, that immediate improvement isn't of that magnitude. But when you take it away, that's when people, so that's the second part of things. Either you make a really big notification, or you notice when it is improved, or you notice when it is taken away. So it actually deconstructing, that is the more explanatory
Understanding.
for yourself.
Yeah. People tend to, a lot of people tend to notice the differences that happen once you take things away, especially if when you add them, it's a semi-subtle improvement, but you take it away and all of a sudden that is magnified. So
exactly, when things are falling apart, then now I understand what it did. Before I noticed that there was a difference. I wasn't really sure what kind of difference it was, and
right.
how it was improving my system. I noticed the difference, but not the details of the difference. Whereas
Sure.
when you take it away, that's when you get the details.
There you go.
Other products like the QSource, you notice immediately what it is as soon as you introduce it into your system. So, and the QPoint is part of that. When you deconstruct or take it away, that's when you understand what it does. Whereas the QSource, as soon as you put it in, it's click, it's there.
Sure. Okay, so we obviously we discussed that the differences that people are finding and the differences that you suggest are happening there. I want to ask you, how are these how are the QPoints generating what they do?
So it's basically a series of coils that is producing that field. That's pretty much how you do that. We have, if you try to open up the QPoint, it is glued, and it's not a very advanced circuit, but we'd like to keep it proprietary, which is
sure.
the other word for secret,
as much as you can
possible.
Tell me.
Yeah, no, it's a series of coils, and of course there is a very precise clock in there, in a bit of a quite smart way to put the circuit together, working with the coils. So it's not rocket science by any means of how the field is generated. It is more how precise, how we can keep it so precise in terms of the resonances and the clocking. So that is, other people can probably do this too, but we've made it, and we're proud of it, and we like to keep it as it is. And in a way, this technology is not so easy to explain with all the details. And we're one of the few companies, I think, that can really get away with products like this, where we demonstrate it, because we have never ever been afraid of demonstrating our products.
Sure.
So as a cable company, mainly, 90% or whatever it is of what we do is cables.
It's cables.
So yeah, and we never go away from demonstrating it. And there is not a single product in our line that we're afraid of demonstrating. So we can actually do that part of it.
Sure.
Whether the technology is easy to explain or not, that's a different, and frankly, it doesn't really mean that much. This is a subjective arena.
Yes.
If we perceive those improvements and we are happy with it, then we do. If you fully understand how a transistor works, which very few people do, it doesn't mean that a better transistor is better than a bad one, because if you don't understand the exact technology behind it, it doesn't really matter as long as you can hear it. So
sure.
That's
and of course you're famous for your demonstrations at various shows around the world, and I was curious as to whether you found QPoint, how it worked, whether it worked in similar ways in different systems, because obviously, every show you'd have a slightly different system, although I suppose you have certain brands that you like to work with, but in general, there'd be different components there from time to time. And I'm just wondering whether you found that the thing that QPoint is doing is consistent, there's various scenarios.
It's a very interesting question, because you remember when I went down to Australia and was traveling around with the Nigel and Advanced Audio?
Yes.
That was one of the first big round trips that I had with the QPoint. And of course, we've tried it out in so many different scenarios beforehand. So I was pretty confident and sure of that I was going to be able to show things the same all around the world.
Sure.
But it is unlike the QX, because that is a product where we find slight differences. It works better in some system and not as good in others. It always works, but there is a variance in how good it performs.
Sure. Yeah.
And because the brute force approach that I was talking about earlier is trying to strip pollutants away. So if you got a lot of pollutants that you can strip, you will notice a bigger difference. Whether you have fewer pollutants that you strip, the difference will be smaller. This is working completely different. And of all the places that I've been to, it's a very, very similar effect, and it's very demonstrable regardless of the system. It can be a small one. One of the bigger or funnier, I should say, differences is with I've done it with quite a few times with the name Muso.
Right.
And the name Muso, it's a very good soundbar.
Yeah.
But it is a soundbar.
Yes.
So it's not a hi-fi system per se as what we normally use.
Sure.
And just using it with the name Muso, it's a very revealing experience of how good and how much this technology actually brings to the table. So it works with big, small systems and all-in-one box solutions and all that. It's a very good technology that way. We're very happy for that. And for me, my work,
of course, makes your work a little bit easier, because basically you can just sort of stand there, let QPoint and QSource do their thing, and they speak for themselves, I guess.
Exactly. And I don't need to try it out beforehand and see, does this work or not? But so it's good. It's all good.
Okay. Now, as a last question, I wanted to ask you, on a more personal level, what excites you about the high end, and also what music incites listening pleasure for you?
Yeah, I am an emotional person, so I really use music either to affect me, as in, you know, I purposely choose a music for the mood that I want to get into, or I get affected by that. So it's really depending on the mood, the situation, and all that. The other thing is that I use music as a work tool. So I listen to a lot of music for evaluations, for designing products.
Sure.
So for work purposes, well done recordings with a lot of the SoundStage depth or space and rhythm and pacing, timing, very well recorded voices are my favorites to do that part of the work. But other than that, you know, I pretty much have everything in my collection that I can go through. Sometimes I really do like the Dvorak, the New World intro there, and
Yes.
And sometimes I just bring out the beer and put on a Metallica.
Awesome. Okay. Well, on that note, we share those sentiments, and so on that note, I'd like to thank you, Björn, for joining us today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you, Björn from Nordost.
Thank you very much, Edgar. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.